So, uh, in order to open up Hamlet, I'm going to read you a poem. It's called King Claudius, and it's by C.P. Cavafy, Constantine Cavafy. Any of you guys heard of him, Cavafy? Really very significant poet who wrote in modern Greek, early part of the 20th century. And he wrote quite a remarkable poem here. This is called King Claudius. My mind now moves to distant places. I'm walking the streets of Elsinore through its squares, and I recall the very sad story of that unfortunate king killed by his nephew because of some fanciful suspicions. In all the homes of the poor, he was mourned secretly. They feared Fortinbras. He was a quiet, gentle man, a man who loved peace. His country had suffered much from the wars of his predecessors. He behaved graciously toward everyone, humble and great alike, never high-handed. He always sought advice in the kingdom's affairs from serious, experienced people. Just why his nephew killed him was never precisely explained. The prince suspected him of murder, and the basis of his suspicion was this. Walking one night along an ancient battlement, he thought he saw a ghost, and he had a conversation with this ghost. What he supposedly heard from the ghost were certain accusations against the king. It must have been a fit of fancy, an optical illusion. The prince was highly strung in the extreme. While he was studying at Wittenberg, many of his fellow students thought him a maniac. A few days later, he went to his mother's room to discuss certain family matters. And suddenly, when he was talking, he lost his self-control, started shouting, screaming that the ghost was there in front of him. But his mother saw nothing at all. And that same day, for no apparent reason, he killed an old gentleman in the court. Since the prince was due to sail for England in a day or two, the king hustled him off post-haste in order to save him. But the people were so outraged by the monstrous murder that rebels rose up and tried to storm the palace gates, led by the dead man's son, the noble Lord Laertes, a brave young man, also ambitious. In the confusion, some of his friends called out, "Long live King Laertes." Later, once the kingdom had calmed down and the king was lying in his grave, killed by his nephew, the prince who never went to England but escaped from the ship on his way there, a certain Horatio came forward and tried to exonerate the prince by telling some stories of his own. He said that the voyage to England had been a secret plot, and orders had been given to kill the prince there. But this was never clearly ascertained. He also spoke of poisoned wine poisoned by the king. It's true that Laertes spoke of this too, but couldn't he have been lying? Couldn't he have been mistaken? And when did he say all this? While dying of his wounds, his mind reeling, his talk seemingly babble. As for the poisoned weapons, it was shown later that the poisoning hadn't been done by the king at all. Laertes had done it by himself. But Horatio, whenever pressed, would produce even the ghost as a witness. The ghost said this and that. The ghost did this and that. Because of all this, though hearing Horatio out, most people in all conscience pitied the good king, who with all these ghosts and fairy tales was unjustly killed and disposed of. Yet Fortinbras, who profited from it all and gained the throne so easily, gave full attention and great weight to every word Horatio said. Now, this is a fantastic poem, opens up a whole new perspective on Hamlet. Any of you know anything about post-colonial literature, this is an example of what's called the Empire Writes Back. Cavafy was living on the fringes of the British Empire, and a lot of his works rewrite the classics of British literature from a kind of anti-British perspective. And here he's rewriting Hamlet for us. Now, I'm not claiming that this is the truth about Hamlet and Claudius. Obviously, this is all fiction, and Shakespeare's play has its own integrity, and Cavafy's poem has its. But I just want to open up for you how these facts might look to an impartial observer at the time, and in a sense to call attention to how absurd Hamlet's claims look to someone who hadn't seen the ghost or maybe doesn't even believe in ghosts. It's my way of trying to highlight for you how over the top the ghost is, because we're so used to it, so used to Hamlet, we accept it as a matter of course that here's a political action governed by a ghost. Now, again, it probably was in the earlier version of Hamlet. It's not in the Hamlet stories before that. But these revenge plays tend to have ghosts. As I said, Thomas Kyd's Spanish tragedy has a ghost in it. You see that Shakespeare likes ghosts. There's a ghost in Julius Caesar. The audience evidently liked ghosts. So Shakespeare had a reason for bringing a ghost here and having the ghost of a dead man demand vengeance from his son. That's a very powerful, dramatic scene. Yet I'm trying to get you to look back at this play and see what's so colossal about it, in a sense, and that is to show us what politics would be like if it was guided by ghosts, by emissaries from another world. And we talked about this in connection with Coriolanus. I told you there that Shakespeare deliberately excluded ghosts, apparitions, signs in the heavens, that in Plutarch's Life of Coriolanus, there was plenty of room for Shakespeare to have a ghost of some kind in Coriolanus, some kind of unearthly apparition, and he deliberately omitted it. And then we trace the pattern in Julius Caesar and Antony and Cleopatra, the emergence of ghosts, the emergence of an otherworldly orientation. Now again, Shakespeare wrote Antony and Cleopatra later, but he did write Julius Caesar just before Hamlet. And it's rather interesting to contrast the ghost scene in Julius Caesar with that in Hamlet. It's on page 87. You can go look it up eventually. It's Act 4, Scene 3, about line 275. Shakespeare makes a point of showing it's late at night, the light is bad, Brutus is sleepy, everyone else has fallen asleep. It all adds up to suggest maybe this is a kind of dream, but in any case, ha! Who comes here? I think it is the weakness of mine eyes that shapes this monstrous apparition. Hamlet never says anything like that. It comes upon me, art thou anything? Art thou some god, some angel, or some devil that makes my blood cold and my hair to stare? Speak to me what thou art. Thy evil spirit, Brutus. Why comest thou? To tell thee thou shalt see me at Philippi. Well then, I shall see thee again, I at Philippi. Why? I will see thee at Philippi then. That's an amazingly calm reaction to a ghost. Here Shakespeare adds a ghost to the classical world. And again, in the plays of Seneca, there were ghosts. There's precedent for this in Latin literature. But I think Shakespeare goes out of his way to show how calmly Brutus accepts the ghost, in contrast to Hamlet's manic behavior when he sees the ghost. So just, the Cavafy poem reminds us that just flip this story a little bit and Hamlet is crazy and there is no ghost and there was nothing wrong with Claudius and why did he have to die, and all these stories are just bunk. So I'm trying to give you a handle on, in a sense, the most striking aspect of this play, the sense it shows us what politics would be like if it were guided by revelation. And more generally by an orientation towards the other world. Because that's what I've been showing you about Hamlet again and again on every issue. His view of this life is completely complicated by his view of the afterlife. And, again, Shakespeare goes out of his way to emphasize the reason Hamlet can't kill Claudius when he has the opportunity is because of his questioning about the afterlife. And we see a kind of hero now who's so very different from the classical heroes who are oriented by this world. Again, we saw so much of how Shakespeare shows the ancient world orienting political life by the perspective of the city, the limited horizons of the city. And in Hamlet, we get this incredible opening up to that new heaven, new earth that Antony spoke of, and which everything in this world is haunted by a scene of another world, and that other world makes this one look corrupt and almost irredeemable. almost in a Christian sense. Hamlet is so convinced of human corruption and sin that it is one of the things that definitely undermines his ability to take arms against the sea of troubles. So again and again in this play, we see currents turn awry. Those words from Hamlet's to be or not to be speech, how the currents of heroism that we saw in the ancient world turn awry when they're confronted with the notion of an afterlife, or in this case, a kind of revelation that comes from the other world and distorts the view of politics. I'm going to finish up on the plot of the play, work out this theme a little bit more there, and how the fifth act fits into this pattern. That is, the fifth act is the culmination of the theme of suicide in the play, something that dominates it from the Hamlet's first soliloquy, where he talks about how the everlasting has fixed his canon against self-slaughter. Hamlet's a man who desperately wants to commit suicide. He finds this world unacceptable, and yet his Christianity forbids his committing suicide. In typical Shakespeare fashion, he offers us another parallel. We've talked about contrasting Hamlet with Fortinbras, with Horatio, with Laertes. We can also contrast him with Ophelia. Ophelia, who strangely enough finds herself in a position very similar to Hamlet, as does Laertes, namely, someone has killed Ophelia's father, Polonius, and it turns out to be Hamlet, the man she loves. So that's another one of these tragic conflicts where her devotion to her father and her devotion to her lover come into conflict. The result is that she goes insane and kills herself. And therefore, Act 5 opens, this is on page 119, with a reminder of the issue that has haunted Hamlet from the beginning, namely the church's attitude towards suicide. Very opening of Act 5, Scene 1 on page 119. Is she to be buried in Christian burial when she willfully seeks her own salvation? And we indeed learn later on page 126, bottom of 126, so Act 5, 1, Scene 1, about line 230, a doctor of the church explains why Ophelia's funeral has been cut short. Her obsequies have been as far enlarged as we have warranty. Her death was doubtful, and but that great command o'ersways the order, she should in ground unsanctified been lodged till the last trumpet. So even the fact that she's being buried in the churchyard is a concession to the court of Denmark. And Laertes, whom we know is willing to cut the throat of people in church, says at line 242, I tell thee, churlish priest, a ministering angel shall my sister be when thou lies howling. Again, not the greatest respect for the established church there, the idea of the churlish priest. But as the gravediggers discuss Ophelia's suicide, a new legal concept emerges: suicide in your own defense. This is back on 119, line 6. The crown has said, and finds it Christian burial. How can that be unless she drowned herself in her own defense? There's a lot of jokes about lawyers in this scene, and here we see the legal mind at its best, the new conception of drowning yourself in your own defense. And the clown goes on and explains it. Bottom of 119, line 15. Here lies the water, good. Here stands the man, good. If the man go to this water and drown himself, it is willy-nilly he goes. Mark you that. But if the water comes to him and drown him, he drowns not himself. Argyle, he that is not guilty of his own death, shortens not his own life. Now, this is a clown, and this is a strange moment of macabre comic relief here, but I'm going to argue as this becomes the principle of Hamlet's suicide in Act 5. He drowns himself in his own defense. That is, Hamlet has been obsessed with suicide, as we know from his soliloquies, and now he finds a way to get himself killed where he does not have to take responsibility. And it is basically, if Hamlet comes to Claudius to kill him and gets killed in the process, that could be viewed as a kind of suicide. But if Claudius comes at him, then Hamlet's going to drown himself in his own defense. It's another way of explaining Hamlet's curious passivity in the play. Some people, talking about Act 5, applaud Hamlet's attitude here when he says, for example, the readiness is all. You will see some critics saying this marks a new maturity in Hamlet. He has come to terms with himself. But in fact, as I was saying last time, in looking at those speeches, it's a kind of fatalism, really, this if it be now, 'tis not to come. And so, and Hamlet is still playing a passive role here. He's giving all these reasons to Horatio why he's now justified in killing Claudius. He knows Claudius's guilt with regard to his father's death. Claudius has been practicing against Hamlet's own life. Hamlet rattles off all these reasons, but still he's not taking action. And in the middle of all this, this guy Osric arrives, setting up a duel between Hamlet and Laertes. Now, if I'd just been wrestling in a grave with a guy and he showed up saying, let's have a fencing match, I'd be a little suspicious, especially if my main enemy who tried to get me executed in England was helping to set up the fencing match. It is not prudent of Hamlet to walk into a room full of weapons and full of enemies. It is, in a way, fatalism at best, but I'd say what Hamlet finally discovers in this act is a way of carrying out his revenge that will get Hamlet killed. It is a form of suicide. That's why I stress the imprudence of it. And Shakespeare actually supplies some telling details in the dialogue that I think point to Hamlet's own suspicions even as he seems to walk blindly to his death. Look at page 139. This is Act 5, Scene 2, about line 266. Laertes is searching among the swords. This is too heavy, let me see another. Hamlet says, this likes me well. These foils have all a length. Now what he's saying there is, aren't all the foils alike? Which means he's noticed that Laertes is looking for a particular foil. In other words, I think Hamlet has begun to detect here that something suspicious is going on. If all the foils are the same, why is Laertes so picky here? I've never seen a director pick up on what I'd call a stage direction in the dialogue here. And even more importantly, on page 140, at line 298, Hamlet says, come for the third, Laertes, you do but dally. I pray you pass with your best violence. I am sure you make a wanton of me. This is an indication, again, that I think every director I've ever seen, and including the movies, missed this point. I think Laertes is deliberately holding back, that he actually does have a conscience, that after having boasted he would cut his throat in the church. In fact, he's having second thoughts about killing Hamlet. And that's why Hamlet wins the first two touches. Remember, that's against the odds. Laertes is supposed to be the better fencer. Every director I've ever seen stages this as if Hamlet and Laertes go at each other full blast from the get-go. The Brano version is particularly extreme in that regard, and you get one of these stupid Hollywood-type fencing matches where By the way, in Hollywood, fencers don't aim at each other, they aim at each other's swords. They miss the whole point of fencing, which is to hit the opponent and not his sword. But anyway, I would stage this with Laertes really holding back, and that's why Hamlet scores the first two touches. And then, at this point, Laertes gets angry and finally goes at it. But it would be an interesting touch to have Laertes show a genuine conscience in the scene, but again, it shows you that Hamlet is aware that something strange is going on. This isn't just an ordinary fencing match here. So, again, that he knows he's walked into something dangerous. Horatio has warned him against it, and nevertheless, he does it. And indeed gets himself killed in the process. You can say he finally accomplishes his revenge, but not according to the terms that his father set down for him, namely not to hurt his mother, not to taint his own mind. In fact, he ends up dead, Laertes ends up dead, and then as a last straw, the kingdom is turned over to Fortinbras. So I don't think the elder Hamlet would be too satisfied with this outcome here. But it is the logical conclusion, in a way, of this complex of feelings that Hamlet has that are fundamentally based in a contempt for Denmark and politics in general, and I've been relating that to his Christian contempt for this world, his Christian contempt for heroism. The odd thing is that ultimately Hamlet shares an attitude with Claudius. They both see the world as corrupt. Claudius then uses that to exploit the world, exploit the corruption. If the world's corrupt, why not grab as much as you can get? Whereas Hamlet's sense of the world's corruption leads him to withdraw from it and despair of ever making it better. I noticed that, again, Claudius is a more complex character than most people think. A lot of people think of him, as Hamlet does, as just this bloody, treacherous villain. Both Derek Jacobi in the Branagh Hamlet and Patrick Stewart in the Derek Jacobi Hamlet do a great job of showing the complexity of the character. But in particular, as I looked it over, I was really surprised to see how often Claudius sounds like Hamlet. If you look, for example, at page, we're going to come back to page 11, line 20, it's talking about what Fortinbras thinks, or thinking by our late dear brother, our state to be disjoint and out of frame. How strange when Hamlet on page 34 says, the time is out of joint. That's Act 1, Scene 5, about line 188. Hamlet says the time is out of joint. Claudius speaks of our state to be disjoint and out of frame. It's weird to think of them as sounding alike, but there are a lot of passages like this. If you look at page 63, for example, this is Act 3, Scene 1. This is line 50. By the way, this is the first moment when we, as audience, know for sure that Claudius is guilty. It's as if Shakespeare supplies this aside so that we don't go the Cavafy King Claudius route here. If we didn't get this speech, we might still be wondering about Hamlet. But anyway, this is Act 3, Scene 1, line 51. The harlot's cheek, beautified with plastering art, is not more ugly to the thing that helps it than is my deed to my most painted word. Now, I'm not going to do this on the final, but if I gave you this as an ID passage, a bunch of you might say it was Hamlet speaking, because this is exactly the mode I've been talking about in Hamlet, to look at a woman's face and see it as covered over with makeup and to see something ugly beneath it. The harlot's cheek, beauty with plastering art, is not more ugly to the thing that helps it than is my deed to my most painted word. Page 84. This is Claudius's prayer. This is Act 3, Scene 3. Let's see, Act 3, Scene 3, about line 55. In the corrupted currents of this world, offenses gilded hand may shove by justice, and oft 'tis seen the wicked prize itself buys out the law, but 'tis not so above. Now that's right out of Hamlet's to be or not to be speech. And the proud man's conquer, the law's delay, the insolence of office. Here it is, as the wicked prize itself buys out the law, but 'tis not so above. Again, Claudius is oriented, sees the corruption of this world against the background of the afterlife. And of course, his whole speech here is based, as is Hamlet's response to, in the scene on the afterlife. Or page 95. This is Act 4, Scene 1, line 21. But like the owner of a foul disease, to keep it from divulging, let it feed even on the pith of life. Again, that's Hamlet's vision of the world as disease. And again, Claudius shares with him this notion of diseases. Page 97. So Act 4, Scene 3, line 8. Diseases desperate grown, by desperate appliance are relieved. So it, again, with obviously all the differences between Hamlet and Claudius, there's the sense in which they share this Christian view of the world as corrupt, diseased, sinful, with people covering over their corruption with a vain attempt at makeup. And the interest, in a way, this attitude produces two responses. It produces the Machiavellianism of Claudius and the kind of resignation of Hamlet. If the world is thoroughly corrupt, make the best of it yourself, which is what Claudius tries to do, and plot and scheme to get whatever you can. Hamlet's view is the same understanding of the world, but with a different reaction, namely, what's the point? You can't reform a world that's so corrupt. So, that's my sense what this play is about, the way this understanding of the world as corrupt and sinful really has a distorting effect on politics, turns the currents awry, especially of heroism in politics. Now, let me make some reference to the possible contemporary allusions in this play. You guys have been asking for, you guys like your politics down and dirty. So people have been coming up to me and asking me, what about King James, and so on. And so again, I resist this. I've been trying to show you Shakespeare as standing above his time and not simply a creature of the Elizabethan world and his politics, but nevertheless, there really are interesting aspects of Hamlet that are worth dwelling upon, having given you a very general view of it in relation to other plays, and particularly in relation to the Roman plays and the question of the relation of the Christian and the classical world. Let me go through some of the apparent references to contemporary issues in the play. At one and the same time, this seems to be a play most removed from Shakespeare's immediate circumstances, but from another point of view, it seems to be deeply involved in them. And again, I do this with some reluctance, but let's see where it takes us. Now, there's one set of allusions in the play that clearly somehow have something to do with Protestantism and Martin Luther. The references to Wittenberg University, clearly that is not just the university that Martin Luther was at, but that's where the Reformation began. 1517, Luther nails his 95 Theses up on a sort of bulletin board at the University of Wittenberg. His challenge to Catholicism and the Pope's authority, and the Protestant Reformation begins. There's one other apparently strong reference here, and that's on page 98. So it'll be Act 4, Scene 3, about line 20. Hamlet's sick lines about Polonius, when he says, Polonius is at supper, not where he eats, but where he is eaten. A certain convocation of politic worms are even at him. Your worm is your only emperor for diet. And as many people have pointed out, this seems to be a reference to the diet of worms, which was not the Renaissance equivalent of the Atkins diet, but diet's also a word of meaning parliament. And the diet of worms, it is spelled the same way, took place in 1521. It was the major Catholic reaction to Luther and the Protestant Reformation. It was convened by Charles V, the Holy Roman Emperor, again in 1521. And the Catholic powers in Europe declared Luther a heretic, in specifically the proclamation that came out of this sort of parliament meeting claimed that no one could harbor Luther. He must be turned over to a Catholic king in order to be imprisoned, perhaps executed. Anyway, now Shakespeare loved puns, and so he may have just thrown in this diet of worms line because he thought it was a really funny pun. But it's pretty strong to have a play that refers to Wittenberg and to the diet of worms. And many people have tried to make something of this. I've been searching around on the internet where you find crazy stuff. And, you know, some people are saying Hamlet is somehow a portrait of Martin Luther. That does not work for me. And part of my problem with these references is none of them seems to add up to a consistent understanding of the play. But I'll say this much, that there is a Protestant stamp on this play. And I'll point it out to you this way, is that we got no bishops and archbishops in this play, as we did in Henry V. The only representative of the church in the play is that churlish priest at Ophelia's funeral. And by comparison with Henry V, the Catholic Church seems conspicuously absent from the politics of this play, so that we're seeing in Claudius's court a rather Protestant court, such as England had at that point, for example, that we're seeing a secular court in Denmark, where the advisors are no longer the archbishops and bishops as we see them in Henry V or in other of Shakespeare's history plays. I'll go even further and say, insofar, I've been talking about Hamlet as a Christian, insofar as he is Christian, he is Protestant. In that he doesn't think of going to a priest to confess or to consult on what should I do about suicide, Father. And indeed, his goal seems to be a very direct relationship to his source of religious knowledge, namely this direct revelation of the ghost to him. So we do see in that effect, in that sense, the transformation of the impact of Christianity on politics from a Catholic to a Protestant situation here. Again, the force of the Protestant Reformation being to establish a direct relationship between the individual and his God. Now, that is complicated, however, by the strange fact that the ghost appears to come from purgatory, which is very much a Catholic notion, and indeed the whole heart of the Reformation really was Luther's denial of purgatory, because his real attack was on the papal policy of indulgences, that you gave money to the church to lessen the time you would have to spend in purgatory. So Luther felt he could undercut the whole indulgence market by getting rid of the notion of purgatory. So Stephen Greenblatt's written a book called Hamlet and Purgatory that examines this issue, and it is very complicated. Where the ghost comes from is not named as purgatory, but it sure as hell sounds like purgatory. So there seems to be some residue of Catholicism there. Anyway, I honestly don't know how to resolve all those issues for you. I bring them up because there's something going on in the play in this regard. I've not yet figured it out completely. One of you might like to write on that subject. Any questions thus far? Okay, now James the First, because this is what I was hit with after one class, and this is very prominent. The play ends, Hamlet ends with a foreigner coming to the throne of England, of Denmark. And many people have connected this to the situation right around when this play was being written and performed, which is 1602, 1603, 1604. There was a tremendous problem of the succession in England at this point. Elizabeth had not married. She had not produced children. She had not designated a successor. And people were very worried what would happen when she died, especially because there were many claimants to the throne, and many of them were Catholic. And people did not want the country to go back to Catholicism after all the bloodshed in the 16th century over the issue of Protestantism versus Catholicism in England. Now, what was engineered was the so-called Scottish succession. James VI of Scotland was in the line to the succession. Again, it had gotten so complicated, no one could really say it was first in line, but he was descended from the Tudors on one line, and he became James I of England, I think it's 1604, and that was the solution. He was, his mother was Catholic, but he became Protestant and was solidly Protestant. So the idea was, we'll accept a Scottish king because he has a pretty good claim to the throne and he is Protestant. And people have tried to explain the Fortinbras moment that way, that the Danes accept a Norwegian because it's somehow good for them. Now, nothing in the play brings up the religious issue, so that we learn that Fortinbras is a Protestant, for example. But I can see why people see some connection here between the succession problem now and Hamlet. Now, when you look at James I, things start getting really weird and interesting. James I's mother killed his father and married the murderer. That's pretty damn strong as a background to Hamlet. That is James I. Now again, this is the man who was James VI of Scotland, James I of England. Maybe I should just call him James. James was the son of Mary, Queen of Scots. Mary Tudor, who herself had a claim to the throne and was a great rival of Elizabeth. Mary was married to a man named Lord Darnley. Again, this ain't going to be on the final, don't worry. I don't even claim to understand this. I have to check Wikipedia periodically to get this right. But Mary was married to a Lord Darnley who killed her secretary, David Rizzio, whom Lord Darnley thought Mary was having an affair with. Thereupon, Mary may or may not have participated in the murder of Lord Darnley. There was an explosion in one of his houses, and he was found smothered outside. They think killed by Lord Bothwell, though he was put on trial for it and acquitted, and Mary then married Lord Bothwell. So there it is. I mean, in James's life, his mother participated in the murder of James's father and married the murderer. And that's really pretty strong stuff there. Moreover, I was checking, Bothwell ended up insane in Denmark. Whoa. And then it gets even weirder in that James was married to Anne of Denmark. And indeed, they were married by proxy in Copenhagen. And then she was sailing over to England to have a full marriage, and there was a storm, and she couldn't make it. And so James sailed over and married Anne of Denmark in Oslo. Denmark and Norway were one country at this time, one kingdom. And you can see in Hamlet the hints of that. So again, you think this Hamlet's so remote from England, but James the First of England was married to Anne of Denmark in Oslo, and they honeymooned in Elsinore. I mean, it couldn't be better. They stayed at Elsinore Castle on the way home. So it's really, and I just, when I first read this play, I thought, Denmark, Norway, that's probably as remote from Shakespeare as Afghanistan would have been. But turns out, I mean, the British royal family was intermarried with the Danish royal family. Turns out, periodically, the theater in London would be closed down because of plague. At some of those points, Shakespeare's theater company went to Copenhagen, where they could perform. The English composer John Dowland spent time in Copenhagen. Scholars have studied that if you picked up the Copenhagen phone book in 1600, it was filled with Rosencrantzes and Guildensterns. Those were very common names. In other words, Shakespeare seems to know something about Denmark in the play, and it wasn't so far away, and there were all these strange connections. Now, having said all that, I don't see how this works out. I just don't see how Hamlet is a portrait of James I of Scotland. It just doesn't compute for me. And what it would be saying, if it did, would have been semi-treasonous, almost as bad as the Mousetrap play itself. I mean, you often, a lot of critics like to see Shakespeare as paying tributes to James I. Shakespeare's company was the Lord Chamberlain's men during Elizabeth's reign. Under James's rule, they became the king's men. James was the direct royal patron of Shakespeare's company. And so I can understand why a lot of people try to find these references to James in Shakespeare's plays, but they're so unflattering. For example, if he's Fortinbras, what does that imply about him? And if he's Hamlet, who wants Hamlet as a king, for example? So I find it hard. I mean, I'm really intrigued by all these strange parallels. I just can't see how they work out. What I will offer is the final set of parallels, and that's Hamlet and the Earl of Essex. We've talked about the Earl of Essex in conjunction with Henry V, where there is a direct reference to him. There's a great deal about Hamlet being the kind of ideal courtier in the play, and that's how Robert Devereux, the Earl of Essex, was presented during the Elizabethan era, and many of he was a great patron of literature and the arts, and he's celebrated much of the literature. And there's been a lot written on Hamlet and the Earl of Essex. Even the famous German jurist and political philosopher Carl Schmitt has written a book that deals with the issue of Hamlet and the Earl of Essex. Again, I don't want to pin it down to some kind of specific identification, but as I've thought through the play, I'll offer you this relevance of it to the contemporary politics of Shakespeare's day, and that I believe that Hamlet illustrates the very problem that Essex life illustrates, namely the inability of Elizabeth's court to channel the ambitions of the young, spirited men in the court. if there were an overall tragedy of Elizabeth's court, it would be that men like the Earl of Essex, the Earl of Southampton, who Shakespeare wanted as a patron, Sir Walter Raleigh, all these men ended up in jail or, in the case of Raleigh and Essex, executed because the Elizabeth court could not find an outlet for their thumos. Exactly what the Roman Republic used to be able to do, namely channel the energies of its young, ambitious men towards the good of the community. In this case, the currents turn awry. As I thought over this play, in terms of the political world it portrays, it's a very negative view of a political world. The image of the court in Denmark, if this is somehow an image of the English court, it's a very nasty comment on Elizabethan politics, because what we see is corruption everywhere, flattery, backbiting, spying, jockeying for position, and a court that is turning in on itself and, in effect, destroying itself, as we see in the end, where virtually everybody is killed. Now, what struck me as the true parallel to Shakespeare's own times was that the issue in Denmark is diplomacy versus war. A relatively peaceful foreign policy versus an aggressive foreign policy. I think I mentioned to you that that was the division within the Elizabethan political world itself. That Elizabeth and her advisors were very cautious, and with good reason. Again, they were not a great power. The great powers in their world were the Ottoman Turks, the Habsburg Spanish Empire, and the French. And England had a very limited army and was just beginning to develop its navy. And remember, in 1589, the Spanish sent an armada to invade England and turn it back to a Catholic country. And really, it was only a combination of bad weather and bad planning on the part of the Spanish, and some heroic actions on the part of the English Navy that saved England from what might have been an absorption into what was effectively the Holy Roman Empire, then under the Habsburgs. And you can see why people like Elizabeth and her advisors were trying to be cautious. On the other hand, as I mentioned, there were people within the court, the Earl of Essex was foremost among them, that wanted to take the fight to Spain, that put together an English armada to try to attack Spain right after the Spanish armada failed. That didn't work out too well. But they did carry out a successful raid on the city of Cadiz. They carried out a raid on the Spanish Azores and robbed a lot of gold-laden ships. These are people like Sir Francis Drake, Walter Raleigh, and Essex, men who were indistinguishable from pirates. And I'm beginning to wonder whether the appearance of those helpful pirates in Hamlet who come out of nowhere may be some kind of tribute to Sir Francis Drake and all those great English pirates. But in any case, the real division in the court was between those who wanted to do what Claudius does, pursue careful diplomacy, not push England's luck, just essentially adopt a defensive position, and then younger men like Essex and Raleigh and Drake who wanted to take the fight to the Spanish. And this has led me to rethink Fortinbras's role in the play. Fortinbras was often written out of productions, but it's very interesting to trace Fortinbras's pattern in the work, starting on page 7. So this is Act 1, Scene 1, when Horatio is explaining the situation to Hamlet. this is where any attempt to allegorize the play becomes ridiculous, because we would now have Essex being explained to Essex here. Now, sir, this is line 95. Now, sir, young Fortinbras of unimproved metal, hot and full, hath in the skirts of Norway here and there sharked up a list of lawless resolutes for food and diet to some enterprise that hath a stomach in it. Now, this is a very negative view of Fortinbras, but think of, flip it. And what we're hearing here is that Fortinbras is an ambitious, spirited young man, full of thumos, has gathered around him a group for some enterprise that had a stomach in it. This is a very, someone with a defensive foreign policy talking about someone with an aggressive foreign policy. And the whole problem is youth here, young Fortinbras. And then turn to page 11. This is Claudius now speaking about Fortinbras. Page 11, Act 1, Scene 2, about line 15. Now follows that you know young Fortinbras, he's always young Fortinbras, holding a weak supposal of our worth, or thinking by our late dear brother's death, our state to be disjointed and out of frame, colleagued with this dream of his advantage, he hath not failed to pester us with message, importing the surrender of those lands lost by his father with all bands of law to our most valiant brother. Now, think about this. Fortinbras is right to hold a weak supposal of Claudius's worth. Claudius is a usurper, and thinking our state to be disjointed and out of frame, Denmark is disjointed and out of frame. It's exactly what Hamlet says about it. Marcellus says there's something rotten in the state of Denmark. Now again, when you first read these lines, one is disposed to take them as an accurate appraisal of Fortinbras. But what I'm saying is Fortinbras actually knows what he's doing here. And indeed, his whole strategy in the play is to exploit the weakness in Denmark, though Norway isn't doing so well either. Still on page 11, so much for him, line 26. Now for ourselves and for this time of meeting, thus much the business is, we have here writ to Norway, uncle of young Fortinbras, who impotent and bedrid scarcely hears of this his nephew's purpose. Now this is where I begin to see a pattern emerge in this play. That the young are energetic and ambitious, and the old are impotent and bedrid. And this has a really interesting application to the Elizabethan court, which by 1600 was getting pretty old. Elizabeth was getting pretty old, and her counselors were getting pretty old. In particular, this man named Lord Burleigh. Lord Burleigh, whose name was William Cecil. Many people have claimed that Polonius is an image of Lord Burleigh. Now again, all these things are disputed, and you can find evidence on both sides. But the interest, Burleigh was in effect Elizabeth's prime minister. For many years he ran the court, and he was chief behind the strategy of not pressing the Spanish too much. Again, he gave support to the revolt, the Protestant revolt against the Spanish Catholic rule in the Low Countries, but it was always, a kind of proxy war. We'll send some aid to them, but let's not overdo it. Burleigh was known for his prolix speech, and that's where many people detect the similarity in Polonius. Page 43, one example of this, Act 2, Scene 2, line 86. My liege and madam, to expostulate what majesty should be, what duty is, why day is day, night, night, and time is time, were nothing but to waste night, day, and time. Therefore, since brevity is the soul of wit, and tediousness of the limbs and outward flourishes, I will be brief. Your noble son is mad. Mad call I it. For to define true madness, what is it but to be nothing else but mad? But let that go. More matter with less art. The queen says, Madam, I swear, I use no art at all. That is mad, 'tis true, 'tis pity, and pity 'tis the true, a foolish figure. Again, contemporary accounts of Lord Burleigh indicated that he used a lot of words. And so this may be making fun of Lord Burleigh. The other interesting thing about Burleigh, Burleigh was a great spy master. He had a very elaborate system of espionage all over the continent, sending out essentially double agents who posed as Catholic renegades and infiltrated the Catholic network all over Europe, even in Rome. Englishmen who'd fled England when it went Protestant and were conspiring to return it to the Catholic fold. Burleigh created this network. Christopher Marlowe may have been one of the agents, for example. All the spying in Hamlet is quite remarkable. After all, Polonius spies on his own son Laertes. Polonius and Claudius are always trying to spy on Hamlet. They use Rosencrantz and Guildenstern to spy on him. They use Ophelia to spy on him. Hamlet, by turn, spies on them. I mean, there was a great fascination with spying at this time, a great fascination with code making and code breaking. Francis Bacon writes a whole section on code breaking and making and the advancement of learning. Particularly struck in reading up on the initial interrogation of Essex after his abortive coup attempt. Burleigh was behind a curtain listening to the whole thing and broke out when he caught Essex lying. Now that's Polonius right there. Polonius is always hiding behind curtains. So again, if there's anything I found really plausible in all these attempts to find specific references, I think it is the idea that Lord Burleigh somehow stands behind the figure of Polonius, and therefore we have a world that's dominated by these old men who are trying to restrain the energies of the young men. So that, for example, one of Hamlet's complaints to Polonius is about old men. This is Act 2, Scene 2, about line 198, when Polonius is inquiring what Hamlet's reading. He says, "Slander, sir, for the satirical rogue says here that old men have gray beards, that their faces are wrinkled, their eyes purging thick amber and plum tree gum, and that they have a plentiful lack of wit, together with most weak hams. All which, sir, though I most honestly and potently believe, yet I hold it not honesty to have it thus set down. For you yourself, sir, should be old as I am, if, like a crab, you could go backward." So Hamlet's very pointed about how old Polonius is. And Polonius seems to dominate this court in Denmark. He's the one that gives the advice and who claims he's never given bad advice. Meanwhile, Norway is ridden by an old and bedridden and impotent king. When you start to head up the politics of this world, it's a gerontocracy. It's a world ruled by old men who are restraining the energies of the young man. And that ties in with Fortinbras's whole plans, it seems to me. This is now page 42. So Act 2, Scene 2, about line 60. Voltaman returns from Norway, having spoken to the old king. So Act 2, Scene 2, line 61. Upon our first, he sent out to suppress his nephew's levies, which to him appeared to be a preparation against the Polak. But better looked into, he truly found it was against your highness. were it grieved that to his sickness, age, and impotence. Again, this is not the healthiest group of rulers in the world here, was falsely born in Ham, sends out arrests on Fortinbras, which he in brief obeys, receives rebuke from Norway, and in fine makes vow against before his uncle, never more to give the assay of arms against your majesty. Whereon old Norway, overcome with joy, gives him 70,000 crowns in annual fee, and is commissioned to employ those soldiers so levied as before against the Pola. With an entreaty herein shown that it might please you to give quiet pass through your dominions for this enterprise, on such regards of safety and allowance as they are to set down. It likes us well, and at our more considered time we'll read and answer and think upon this business. And then Polonius says this business is well ended. Well, if I'd heard that somebody was sending an army against my country, and now I hear, oh, well, it's going against Poland instead, but the army would like to come through my country on its way to Poland, I'd be a little suspicious of that. And indeed, people who've kind of probed this have suggested that, that Fortinbras is pursuing a brilliant strategy here. His aim is to get back his father's lands that the elder Hamlet won from him, and maybe even get Denmark. And so he's got an army which he's sending to Denmark, but the king of Norway says no, and so Fortinbras says, okay, let me go attack Poland instead, which was my original pretext. He gets extra money and raises more troops, and then there he is on page 100. This is Act 4, Scene 4. Go, captain, from me, opening of Act 4, Scene 4. Go, captain, from me, greet the Danish king. Tell him that by his license, Fortinbras craves the conveyance of a promised march over his kingdom. So Fortinbras evidently goes off and conquers Poland, and then has his army right there in Denmark at the key moment. Now, a number of directors have really picked up on this, and it's been emphasized, and nowhere more so than in Brano's film. If you do see the Brano film, I mean, in the Brano film, the Fortinbras' armies, they're like paratroopers. They just descend upon the Danish palace and take over. And I mean, in Brano's film, it wouldn't matter if Hamlet gave the election to Fortinbras. Fortinbras has already taken over. But in any case, what all this adds up to me, is a tension in the play between the spirited, aggressive, ambitious young men and this gerontocracy, these old men who are trying to cling to rule and who aren't making room for the young men. Now you see, Denmark is not fulfilling for its youth. Laertes wants to go to France. Hamlet and Horatio and Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, they're off at Wittenberg. Norway is not fulfilling for its youth. Think back to Henry V. And that it is remarkable when you look at the contrast between the politics of Henry V and the politics of Hamlet. Now is the youth of England all afire for France. That's the great theme in Henry V. And what I was saying about Henry V is that he manages to unify the kingdom by directing its energies towards a foreign power, towards an enemy. He unites his people behind him in the quest to conquer France, and especially the youth. And there's this outlet for their ambitions. They're all going to enrich themselves and win honor in the fight against France. Just think about it for a minute. That's what Claudius should be doing. I'd heard for years that, and you see it in the Cavafy poem, that Claudius is a good king because he's pursuing the diplomatic solution. I wonder if that's Shakespeare's attitude towards it. That in fact, what's lacking in Denmark, what's rotten in Denmark, is any outlet for the ambitions of its youth, and therefore that's, again, the currents turn awry. And we see the sort of revenge of Fortinbras, who pursues the aggressive policy, who doesn't let the chances go by. It's very curious, again, looking at This play is so much about the ignobility of this court. I'm trying not to make too much contemporary politics, but in between Henry V and Hamlet is the Essex Revolt and the death of Essex. I don't want to reduce Hamlet to this, but if you want to talk about something in Shakespeare's day that turned his view, at least of English politics, you can see in Henry V the great hopes of the Essex party. We saw it in the chorus before Act 5, that just as Henry conquered in Agincourt, just as the Roman generals celebrated their triumphs, our Earl of Essex is about to have a great military triumph in Ireland. And what a great moment that will be. Now, that did not happen. In fact, a year or so later, Essex was dead in disgrace. And to the extent anything in Shakespeare's day accounts for what I'm portraying as this shift in the portrayal of the court, that would be it. Hamlet is the post-Essex play. And indeed, it works out neatly that way in the chronology. And now that hope is gone. Shakespeare was, as many of his contemporaries were looking for a way that England could become great, that it could pursue the path of empire, that it could follow Roman models, and he offers Henry V as a way of doing that. And it really depends on a very aggressive foreign policy. And now we see a court that I'm saying looks an awful lot like Elizabeth's real court, especially with a figure like Lord Burleigh ruling it. And there are even, I don't know if anyone's made this point, but when Laertes comes back after his father's death and bursts into the court, it's a bit like an image of the Essex Rebellion, with people suddenly saying, out of nowhere, let Laertes be king. Anyway, I think the play is haunted by contemporary politics to that extent, that this play is in some ways the darkest view of politics in all of Shakespeare, because it is so corrupt. Those scenes with Osric at the end are so vicious about courtiers. Indeed, it goes on at such length. This is page 133, these exchanges when Hamlet's, this is page 133, Act 5, Scene 2, Hamlet describes Osric as spacious in the possession of dirt. What an incredible line about, these people that are supposed to be the great men of the court, but really all they are is spacious in the possession of dirt. And then, Osric is presented as the absolutely worst kind of courtier, the flatterer. He's pretentious. Hamlet makes fun of him. Page 134 at the top, so Act 5, Scene 2, about line 113, where Hamlet parodies the kind of exaggerated language that courtiers use. Sir, his definement suffers no perdition in you, though I know to divide him inventorially would dazzle the arithmetic of memory, and yet but yaw neither in respect of his quick sale. But in the verity of extolment, I take him to be a soul of great article, and his infusion of such dearth and rareness as to make true diction of him his semblable as his mirror, and who else would trace him, his umbrage nothing more. Your lordship speaks most infallibly of him. The consonancy, sir, why do we wrap the gentleman in our more rawer breath? So there it is. I mean, he's making fun of the kind of elaborate language of the court where people just speak and nothing comes out. So it's, I really think you see a reaction in this play on Shakespeare's part against this Elizabethan court world that he lived in and functioned in a sense that it's all corrupt. It's only people striving to advance in the world. They will flatter. You see how much Osric flatters Hamlet, the whole business about whether he has his hat on or not. So this, if this does have contemporary reference, it's pretty negative, and I see it as a collapse of Shakespeare's hopes that England might be able to channel the virtues and the valiantness of its youth towards good ends. The thing about what's so strong in Hamlet, in the politics, is the absence of a common good. If you look back to the Roman plays, what a strong sense there was there of the good of Rome. Even in the last days of the Republic, people were making reference to it. In this play, so much of the court is wrapped up in private concerns. Even Claudius, it's hard to disentangle his desire for the throne for his desire for Gertrude. That is, that maybe he's killed the elder Hamlet to get Gertrude, and not because he sees anything glorious about the throne here. Hamlet hates Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, his old friends, because they become courtiers. Look at page 96. Act 4, Scene 2, about line 14. Take you me for a sponge, my lord. I, sir, that soaks up the king's countenance, his rewards, his authorities, but such officers do the king best service in the end. He keeps them like an ape in the corner of his jaw, first mouthed to be last swallowed. When he needs what you have gleaned, it is but squeezing you in sponge, you shall be dry again. It's a play that sends up the whole world of the Elizabethan court. Now, it is interesting that the play itself contains a comment, if you will, on the political satirical function of drama, and that is the play within the play, the mousetrap. As we do not have anything from Shakespeare writing in his own voice about the function of drama. No prefaces, no letters, no little essays. It's a shame we don't. But the closest we come, really, is the play within the play. That is, we see here drama, and if nothing else, it shows us that Shakespeare saw that drama has a political function. I dwell on this because there's a whole course on Shakespeare and politics, and in a way this is my best evidence. That is, that Hamlet uses a play for political purposes here. He's trying to find out the truth about Claudius, and so he stages a drama that reproduces the situation of the murder of Hamlet's father, and it has the desired result of Claudius's unburdening his guilt. But notice it does turn on the idea that drama can have a direct political result. And the reason it does is because of a kind of esoteric nature of the drama, that it's targeted at two audiences. The play is in fact offered as just a play, and in that sense harmless, to almost all the viewers. But two people are going to get its message. Well, three, counting Hamlet, but Claudius will get it because he'll recognize himself in the image of the murder of the king. But Horatio has been forewarned by Hamlet. Look at Claudius. If he do blench, we have our man. And Hamlet, in talking about the theater, and he does so at length, keeps talking about different audiences. And it is remarkable how long the conversations about the theater are. But if you turn to page 55, so Act 2, Scene 2, Hamlet talking to the player. I heard these, it's about line 443. I heard thee speak me a speech once, but it was never acted, or if it was, not above once. For the play, I remember, please not the million, 'twas caviary to the general. but it was as I received it in others, whose judgment in such matters cried in the top of mine, an excellent play, well digested in the scenes, set down with as much modesty as cunning. So there Hamlet distinguishes between the general audience who can appreciate a good play when they see it, and a really discriminating audience who can. This distinction keeps coming up. Page 78, for example. Well, now I can't. I think I got the wrong page. Oh yes, page 78. Act 3, Scene 2, about line 280. Why let the stricken deer go weep, the hart on golden play, for somewhat must watch while some must sleep. Thus runs the world away. And again, the idea is a play can have one message to part of its audience while the others sleep through it. Or page 69, the distinction here, the top of the page, this is Act 3, Scene 2, about line 25. Now this overdone or come tardy off, though it makes the unskillful laugh, cannot but make the judicious grieve. Again, the distinction between the unskillful and the judicious here. And so this is the force of drama here. Hamlet takes it very seriously. Page 58, it's Act 2, Scene 2, line 535. He calls the players the abstract and brief chronicles of the time. After your death, you would better have a bad epithet than their ill report while you live. So it is a sense here that he is making a reference to the contemporary events there, or the most famous lines he speaks here, page 68. This is Act 3, Scene 2, about line 23. For anything sore or overdone is from the purpose of playing, whose end, both at the first and now, was and is to hold us toward the mirror up to nature, to show virtue our own feature, scorn our own image, and the very age and body of the time, his form and pressure. So holding the mirror up to nature, insofar as we... Now again, this is Hamlet speaking, and we cannot simply attribute these ideas to Shakespeare. Still, there seems to be an awfully concerted effort in this play to bring up the issue of drama and have Hamlet, one of the most intelligent characters in Shakespeare, if not the most intelligent of them all, make these comments. And again, the stress is on the inner nature of the text, what it can convey to a judicious part of the audience, and the fear on Hamlet's part is the clowns will add jokes of their own, they'll mess up the text. It's one of the cases, this is on page 69, this is Act 3, Scene 2, line 40. Or reform it altogether, and let that and let those that play your clowns speak no more than is set down for them. For there be of them that will themselves laugh to set on some quantity of barren spectators to laugh. This is a good example of Shakespeare's regard for his own text. Many people say, oh, Shakespeare really didn't care about the text of his plays. Well, Hamlet sure cares about the text plays and complains when any of the actors depart from the text. So it's I think you get a sense here of Shakespeare's own view of his drama, that it was popular. It did have to appeal to a very broad audience to be successful. At the same time, he was not entirely comfortable with that. Walter Kaufmann once said of Shakespeare, he gave his pearls the odor of the sty before casting them before swine. I think that's such a marvelous characterization of Shakespeare, that he knew what the audience wanted and he gave it to them, and that's why he was successful. But he didn't let that corrupt his art entirely, and it's a good indication here of how we have to read Shakespeare. That if this play within the play is a comment on drama, its comment is that drama is political, that it does have relevance to political situation, and we can say to the specific circumstances of the court here. So that's why again, I'm always reluctant to try to pin these plays down to specific political circumstances. You know, I don't want you to go away saying, oh, Hamlet's really about the Earl of Essex, or Hamlet's really about James I, or it's really about Elizabethan politics. It's not in the sense that it's limited to that. But what Shakespeare does do is link up his play with contemporary events, and what he sees in both are general political problems. In other words, it's not that he's a member of the Essex faction and using this play to get back at Burleigh. No, he was able to perceive in his own day the same problem that Machiavelli perceived in the Italy of his day, and that both Shakespeare and Machiavelli see in ancient Rome. Namely, what do you do with thumatic young men? In some ways, it's the political problem. What do you do with the ambitions, the contentiousness, the rivalry of young men? Remember, this play is just filled with rivalrous young men, and especially Hamlet and Laertes, but also Hamlet and Fortinbras, and so on. And the answer is the Machiavellian answer, and I think to some extent Shakespeare's answer. You've got to direct it somehow towards the common good. You've got to link spiritedness to public spiritedness. You've got to find an outlet for these energies. You've got to direct them outward, say to the conquest of France, or the conquest of Norway, or the conquest of Denmark, in the case of Fortinbras. Otherwise, the currents turn awry. They turn inward, and the rivalrous young men become destructive. They kill each other off, as happens in this play. It actually is a very frightening image of what happens to a court when it has no sense of the common good, when all the energies are turned inward to things like private revenge and personal gain. So I think, again, this is rooted in an experience Shakespeare would have been observing in his own day, but it's not limited to that. And the reason this is a great play is that it refers to a perennial political problem, one of the central of all political questions, and one that Shakespeare also explored in Rome. Okay, I do not claim to have exhausted Hamlet, only to have exhausted myself. This play it is a mystery wrapped in an enigma and a riddle. I mean, we will never figure it out. I've tried to open up some additional perspectives on it for you today, including some that I myself don't know how to pursue. But anyway, next time we will turn to Othello. See it as the flip side of the story of Hamlet.